Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. Every year, 3 million people hike the Appalachian National Scenic Trail that spans 14 states and runs more than 2,190 miles. The famed AT is said to be the longest hiking trail in the world, and it's right here in our backyard. About 230 miles of the AT are in Pennsylvania, including the halfway point at Pine Grove Furnace State Park. But who maintains the trail? Who builds and repairs the shelters for thru-hikers? Who takes the time to clear brush, chop down trees, and get rid of invasive species? Volunteers. Thousands and thousands of volunteers with families and jobs spend countless hours every year maintaining the trail, dwellings, and more. Since the inception of the AT, the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club in Reading has been heavily involved. The club has helped build and maintain their rocky and rugged 65-mile section of the Appalachian Trail and its cabins, shelters, monuments, and rest-stops between Lehigh and Susquehanna Rivers for nearly 100 years. I'm excited to welcome David Bailey to the podcast. David is the former president of the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club and current chairman of the club's Trails Committee. David, thanks for joining the program.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Tell us about how the club formed and its mission.
Well, the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club formed in 1916. Early in 1916, a number of individuals from the Reading area got together and went to Charlottesville, Pennsylvania, and then hiked up Blue Mountain. And their goal was to visit an eagle's nest on Blue Mountain, right? And if you think about it, this would have been a period when a lot of raptors were being shot. And so it was very unusual to have an eagle's nest anywhere that you could access it. And they ended up enjoying the hike so much and each other's company so much that they decided to do a second hike in the fall. So in October of 1916, the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club was born. And the first president was William Shanneman, who was at the time the mayor of Reading. And since then, the club was approached about 10 years later to help lay out the Appalachian Trail. And that really became a centerpiece of the club's activity. And they finished that up in 5 years. They actually laid out 102 miles of the trail, everything between the Susquehanna River and the Lehigh River. And that's really sort of what's the glue that's held the club together, although we have lots of other activities as well. I guess the goals of the club ultimately are preserving the forests and the wildlife that surround the Appalachian Trail. Part of our mission is to encourage hiking and camping and the appreciation of nature. Of course, preservation of the Appalachian Trail. We also spend a lot of time building or maintaining already built structures for public use along the Appalachian Trail and in other areas. And then as a hiking club, as opposed to a trail maintenance club, we strive to provide activities that our club members can enjoy and be able to appreciate nature and enjoy each other's company. That's really the mission of the club.
When and how did you first become involved in the club?
Oh, that's a great story. In 2015, I was trying to put together a backpacking program through my local Boy Scout camp. And this would have been a week-long backpacking program along the Appalachian Trail. And so I started reaching out to different organizations that were effectively stakeholders in maintaining the Appalachian Trail. And one of those was BMEC, the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club. And while the backpacking program never came together, I became a regular member of the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club at that point, and then have held a couple of different positions in the club since then. I had sporadically volunteered for the club prior to that, but really my commitment started in 2015.
How would you describe the sections of the trail the club maintains?
Rocksylvania. Our section runs along Blue Mountain, which is a wonderful ridge that runs really from the southwest part of the state up to the northeast. And we call it Rocksylvania because during the ice ages that occurred in the past, this was all a periglacial area, which meant that it was very cold, and we have a lot of rock outcroppings that have been broken up by frost wedging, and so it creates a really rocky environment. It's very much different from the Appalachian Trail where it crosses the Cumberland Valley in Pennsylvania. I guess the other ways I would describe it are scenic. There are a number of really spectacular overlooks on our section of the trail. And there's a lot of history on our section of the trail as well. One of the probably most significant, to my mind, historical areas is Rausch Gap, which is part of the club section of the Appalachian Trail. And Rausch Gap is an old railroad town that was abandoned over 100 years ago, and it's just sort of disintegrated, so that the only thing that's left are foundations. It's a Pennsylvania style ghost town. Right out west, you get ghost towns with standing buildings. Well, the weather here doesn't allow the wood to last that long, but stone foundations, they last forever.
You mentioned Rocksylvania. That's the moniker that most Appalachian Trail hikers think when they come through this state. How tough is your section compared to other sections here in Pennsylvania?
Oh boy. um, you know, we've got some rough sections around Bake Oven Knob that are probably the equal to um, what some people call the Nice Edge, which is actually another club section. Um, Lehigh Lehigh Gap is often referred to as a particularly tough section, climbing down into and back up out of the Lehigh Gap. We've got a pretty significant descent and climb here in our section, just outside of Port Clinton, and we like to say that it's 1,000 foot climb in the space of a mile. So we've got a pretty steep climb in our section as well. So I would I would put it up against any other portion of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania and say that ours is as difficult, if not more so.
What kind of work does the club do to maintain 65 miles of the Appalachian Trail?
It covers a wide variety of things. Um, Removing blowdowns, um, moving water off of the trail. Those are two of the big things. Um, We also maintain a number of shelters, and there's work involved in that as well. And then there are trail relocations that happen occasionally, especially most recently because the original section of trail that had been laid out had become heavily eroded, and we had a lot of water that would flow on it seasonally, and so we got a lot of braiding where people created paths around that section of trail. And by closing that and rerouting it, we've eliminated a lot of that braiding, a lot of those sort of social trails that sprang up. And the point there is we want to really minimize um, the negative impact on the environment that use of the trail presents.
What's the most challenging aspect of trail maintenance?
Keeping the rocks nice and sharp. We send people out every week with big files, and no, I think that would really depend on what section of the trail you're talking about. There are some sections of trail that are very heavily used by the public, and so we get regular feedback talking about trees that are down and blocking the trail. And that requires maybe more attention than a section of the trail that's not as heavily used, or maybe the best way to think about it is it's used by hikers that are more used to encountering some of those obstacles as opposed to people that are less frequent hikers or maybe day hikers. But there are other issues as well. We've got sections of the trail that will become overwhelmed with mile a minute if they're not trimmed back on a regular basis during the summer. So while typically the Appalachian Trail Conservancy says we should be working on the trail 4 times a year, we've got folks that are out on their section sometimes 7, 8 times a year. It really just depends on what the local conditions are.
Wow, that's a lot of dedication.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've got some trail maintainers that have been maintaining their section of trail for 40 or more years at this point. So a lifetime of commitment for some of our members.
It kind of reminds me of when you drive down the road and they say this section of road is maintained by, and then it has, the Rotary Club or something like that. It must feel pretty incredible to know that the reason hikers are able to complete these amazing missions of hiking the Appalachian Trail or even going for a day hike is really because of the work of you and the members.
Oh yeah, it's one of the sayings that we use pretty regularly in the club here is taking care of the trail takes care of all of the different users because people come to the trail with a variety of different motivations. It may be a through hiker, it may be a section hiker, it could be a through hiker that's trying to establish fastest known time on the trail. Others are just casual day hikers who might be out looking at the leaves as they change color in the fall, and we really provide all of them with a trail that they can use to accomplish what they're looking to accomplish on the trail.
How many shelters does the club maintain?
7. We start on the western end of our section in Roush Gap at the Roush Gap shelter. And the easternmost shelter that we maintain is the Bake Oven Shelter. And Bake Oven Shelter has been around probably since the 1930s. It is a sort of classic Appalachian Trail shelter. Others are more recent. We just did probably about 16 or 17 years ago, maybe a little more recently, we completely rebuilt the Roush Gap shelter. Um, Back in the 70s, we built a new shelter that hadn't been in existence before, which is the Eagle's Nest shelter. And there are some fantastic photos of that actually being flown in by helicopter to be placed in its location. So some of these shelters are built by our members where we're literally peeling the bark off of the logs and building what is effectively a log cabin. Others are kits. It all depends on who's available and what sort of financial resources are available.
The club maintains a wide variety of shelters, including open air shelters, a farmhouse, outbuilding, and a pavilion. What sort of regular maintenance has to be done to these structures?
You know, we have all sorts of challenges. Some of the ones that do come up is trying to keep rodents and other animals out from the shelters, which is it's a never-ending task, and it's not completely possible. Um, so we'll have like a wire or mesh to exclude rodents from shelters, especially like the under portions of the shelter. Um, we have issues with carpenter bees. We have to reshingle shelters occasionally. And as I'd suggested before, there are some times when shelters are just in such poor shape they simply need to be replaced. And that's again that goes back to the Roush Gap shelter most recently.
How do you collaborate with other groups to ensure the miles of trail before and after the sections you cover are taken care of?
Oh boy, that's a great question. The um, the short answer is we get a lot of feedback from both the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and from neighboring clubs, right? If the Appalachian Trail Conservancy uh, gets some reports from a hiker about a portion of the trail that it's not really being maintained the way it should be, they send that to us. Um, if we have a hiker that shares information with a neighboring club or a member of a neighboring club, and we had that happen just recently. Um, they get in touch with me, so we work with clubs on either side of our section of the trail as needed. Um, we actually get a lot of feedback from hikers. You know, we have a couple of individuals that serve as resident caretakers for a couple of our shelters that we maintain. And so if they get a chance to interact with hikers, they'll share a phone number and say, hey, can you let me know as you're headed north or headed south, wherever the hiker's off to, what you see for conditions on the trail. And then those are passed on to our trails chair or our shelters chair. Um, we also do a lot of work with different government agencies. Sort of the philosophy behind the Appalachian Trail is cooperative management. The Appalachian Trail is actually administered by the National Park Service. They have outsourced a lot of their responsibilities to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. That's a really unique relationship between the National Park Service and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And then, not to oversimplify, but the Appalachian Trail Conservancy then sort of sections up the entirety of the Appalachian Trail, which is approximately 2,200 miles, and gives different clubs responsibilities for different sections. I think of the individual clubs as being sort of franchisees of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. It's not exactly true, but close enough. But then the really interesting thing in the section of the state that we're in is that unlike big sections of the Appalachian Trail in other states, the majority of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania passes through state forest, state game lands, state park. It even passes through a municipal watershed. And these are all partners that we work to manage the Appalachian Trail with. For example, if the Game Commission is doing a controlled burn, they reach out to us and let us know what portions of the trail that's going to impact. And they'll actually station individuals at both ends of the impacted area, sure that they don't have uh, hikers going into those areas while there's a burn going on. So there's a constant flow of information back and forth between the club and all the different land managers. And like I said, that's unusual to have those sort of relationships compared to other parts of the Appalachian Trail. And I personally really enjoy it. I think if you're an outgoing person, it's a great way to meet a lot of different people that work at a lot of different levels of government. So that's really the way we coordinate most of our work with other organizations that are also responsible for managing the land that the Appalachian Trail passes through.
I would have to think that relationships between these individual organizations, state agencies, federal agencies, trail agencies, if those aren't done well, everything kind of falls apart.
Well, there are agreements in place that sort of give us a base level of support, right? There is a memorandum of understanding between the National Park Service and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. and all of the different state agencies um, that are responsible for managing the land that the Appalachian Trail passes through. Um, so that gives us a very basic level of support and understanding what each side is responsible for. But it also takes a lot of communication, and our individual section maintainers are in regular contact. The majority of our section of trail runs through state game lands, and there are three different land managers that our section maintainers are in regular contact with. And occasionally, if a land manager changes, the way they want us to reach out to them changes. That's just part of the way all of this works. Um, but I think we have some pretty good relationships with the different land managers.
What do you want hikers to feel when they're hiking in the sections the club maintains?
You know, that's that's a really interesting question. I think individual hikers will. Well, let me put it a different way. I think everyone comes to the trail with their own objectives or desires, things they want to accomplish. And so I don't talk as much about what I hope hikers experience when they come through our section of trail as much as what are we doing that will help these hikers achieve what they want to achieve when they come to the trail. For example, we lead some hikes to places like the Pinnacle, and we have a lot of non-members that will join us on those hikes. And for some of them, hiking to the Pinnacle, because there's a fairly significant climb. It's for some folks, it's a long hike. It's about 8 miles round trip. Um, this is really something that they want to achieve, and it gives them this tremendous sense of accomplishment. And I'm really thrilled that we're able to be a part of that and have been a part of that. So I don't see it as much about um, what it is. I hope the hiker is getting out of the trail as much as it is what does the hiker come to the trail looking to achieve or looking to have happen.
I think a lot of time is spent, or a lot of wasted time is spent thinking the Appalachian Trail are only for certain kinds of people. They're going from north to south, south to north. They're doing the whole thing. It's only for them. And then you leave out a whole group of people that are just day hikers that want to just enjoy the time that they're going to spend there for a couple hours. Is that an issue that you really have run into? Not necessarily with members, but with people that are actually on the trail.
There are about somewhere between COVID has really impacted this. Somewhere between 2 to 4,000 people um, that try to through hike the Appalachian Trail. That would be hike the trail in one season. 2,200 miles in say a 6 month period. Um, but that's 2 to 4,000 is a very small number. If you look at the number of people that actually access the Appalachian Trail, um, it is in the millions. And when you think about what Benton Mackay, who first envisioned the Appalachian Trail, wanted to achieve, he saw people from urban areas using the trail as an opportunity to get out into nature, escape, the industrial cities of the early 1900s, enjoy nature for a day, for a weekend, for a week. I don't know that he ever envisioned through hikers. First through hiker happened in the 1940s, shortly after the end of World War II, and the number of through hikers has been growing every year, with a few exceptions. But the vast majority of people that get out onto the trail are just looking for an afternoon's enjoyment, maybe a weekend or a long weekend of backpacking. Um, maybe they're looking for a week of backpacking, but I would say the majority are out for an afternoon or maybe a weekend. And that's never really been any sort of an issue for us. Those those sort of hikers utilizing the trail have just as much of an opportunity to achieve what they want to achieve on the trail as a through hiker does.
What are some highlights of the AT in the 65 miles the club maintains?
I would say there are a number of them. The Pinnacle certainly is an extremely popular one. That is reputed to be the most spectacular vista in the state of Pennsylvania. Um, I personally think Roush Gap Village, which is right along the trail, that Pennsylvania ghost town is a fascinating place to visit. Um, there's a cemetery there. There's a well. There are all of the foundations of the homes. Roush Gap Village at one time supported 1,000 people. It was the headquarters of the railroad that ran from the Schuylkill River to the Susquehanna River. And after the 1850s, 1860s, it died as a town, um, but a really interesting place. Um, there are a number of other really spectacular spots. Bake Oven Knob is a wonderful place for watching bird migrations in the fall. It's also a really interesting historical location. I think of Bake Oven Knob, and this is going back to some railroading history, when they were pushing the transcontinental railroad across the U.S. Right, um, you had a group that started in the east and worked west, and you had a group that started in California and worked east, and eventually the two lines met. And if you remember your history, that's where they drove the golden spike that connected the two lines and made the transcontinental railway a reality. Well, Bake Oven Knob is to my mind the golden spike of the Appalachian Trail in the state of Pennsylvania. That's where the Appalachian Trail and the different sections all met um, and completed the trail across the length of Pennsylvania. I guess some of the other areas I really like that are quieter hikes would be the hike from Swatara State Park into Roush Gap, or from Swatara State Park to Route 645. Those are quieter sections of the trail that, unless really to my mind, unless you have a reason to be there, those aren't sections of trail that get trafficked heavily. And those are some really nice, quiet, peaceful hikes.
Do you have an idea how many people hike your trail sections a year?
No idea. Uh, all, all I can say is out of our 65 miles of trail, there are 9 parking areas, and that's an undercount. And I know it's an undercount. So we've got parking on average every 6.5 miles along the trail. That means a lot of people are accessing our section of the trail. And again, to go back to numbers from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, this is again the trail as a whole. Literally millions of people access the Appalachian Trail every year. So, not to take anything away from through hikers, but they're just a very, very small percentage of the people that use the Appalachian Trail during the course of the year.
Let's talk a little bit more about maintaining the trail. How important are volunteers for maintaining the AT?
I'm going to go back to an interview that's 10 or 12 years old at this point, and just sort of talk about that. At the time, this was a new superintendent for the Appalachian Trail that was coming in through the National Park Service. And as I recall, she indicated that the trail would require 310 full time park employees to maintain. Well, the reality is there are probably about 5 park employees, National Park Service employees devoted to the trail, and maybe about 60 Appalachian Trail Conservancy employees devoted to the trail. So um, you do the math. The uh, the vast majority of the work on the trail is done by volunteers. The vast majority of the work, and that's really how the Appalachian Trail was born, as a volunteer-driven organization. The Park Service only got involved in the Appalachian Trail in the late 1960s with the passage of the National Scenic Trails Act. Prior to that, um, it was all volunteer managed, every inch of it.
Do you have an idea how many hours your club members spend maintaining the AT?
The hours I submitted to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy in October of 2022 were 1,525 hours. And again, that's an undercount. I have plenty of volunteers that simply don't report their hours.
That's a lot of volunteer hours.
It's a wonderful thing that they're doing. It's absolutely a wonderful thing that they're doing.
How many members does the club have?
I'd say it hovers around 170, 180. Um, some are really active in trail maintenance. Some are frankly older members who can't get out and do trail maintenance any longer, but still support the club with their membership financially. We've never really been a club that asks for donations. So our financial support all comes from memberships.
What can people do to help?
There are a number of places you can go to look for volunteer opportunities on the Appalachian Trail. Not just our section. Um, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy website has a place where you can look for volunteer opportunities, and we often list some of our bigger activities. We always have a big spring work day in March or early April. Um, and that will show up on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's website. Um, but we also have our own club website, and we post all of our work trips on that as well. So there are plenty of places people can go to find opportunities to come out and volunteer on the trail. And I'm going to sort of address one of the things that we do hear from some people that are interested in volunteering, which is, I don't really know that I have the skills that I need. We also do all sorts of basic skills programs, and they can find those on our website as essential maintenance workshops, where we'll discuss and show them how to move water off of the trail, how to deberm so that water moves off of the trail. We have regular chainsaw training classes offered through the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. So there's all sorts of educational opportunities, and we also have a tool library so that if someone wants to come out and help but doesn't have the tools themselves, there are tools that we can loan them.
David, if somebody's interested in joining the club, where should they go to learn more?
www.bmec.org. And BMEC is BMECC, Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club.
David, thanks so much for joining the podcast. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you.
I want to thank my guest, David Bailey, for joining the podcast. Be sure to visit our website and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more information about upcoming episodes. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Uncle Traveling Matt's Random Expedition.